Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Hello everybody and welcome to a bonus episode of Heroes and Humans on Football. And it's very sad for me as well because it's about Johan Neeskens, the great Dutch footballer of the 70s, and a hero of mine, who died suddenly last week as we speak. He was 73 years old. He was on a coaching program in Algeria, and boom, the end came. There was such an outpouring of love when he died. I think so many of us who grew up with Dutch football, but people around the world realized how much we loved him, what a favorite player he was, that I felt we had to do an episode.
Okay, so this episode is very much going to be me hosting this small therapy/obituary session for you to talk about your memory of Neeskens.
A lot of what I'm saying I've taken from Jaap Visser's lovely book of photographs and texts with Neeskens. Neeskens had not seen the point in writing an autobiography until his grandson, aged 3, discovered that his grandfather used to be a famous footballer and wanted to know all about his grandfather's life. And that's when Neeskens finally consented to do this book with Jaap Visser.
So let's talk about the moment you heard he died. You mentioned that there was a surprise outpouring of emotion, but how did you feel, Simon?
All these images came to my head. You know, he was such an evocative figure. I see him sliding. We'll come to the sliding because it was a particular Neeskens speciality. I remember him blood all over his shirt in a World Cup final. I remember him flying in to score that goal against Brazil in 74. And you don't really remember anything he said because he wasn't a man of words. But just the image of this battler, someone who the crowds loved. I mean, I have been reading about him, and one thing he said, I played football to the rhythm of the crowd. That was so Neeskens. Ronald Koeman, who's the Holland manager, I think was somewhat teary when he spoke about it. He'd worked with Neeskens. Neeskens was always an assistant coach, mostly an assistant coach. That was where he felt happiest. And Ronald Koeman, who was a brilliant footballer in his own era, said, when I was a kid on the street in the 1970s, I wanted to be Neeskens. And that really hit a chord because I think so many of us wanted to be Neeskens. You couldn't be Cruyff because Cruyff wasn't fully
unattainable.
Human. Yeah.
How did he die?
The Dutch organised this project called World Coaches. It's the Foreign Ministry and the Dutch Football Association. And they send coaches out to essentially coach kids, especially kids who've had a hard time, sometimes in refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon, where Neeskens, who really cared very much about poor children, partly because of his own childhood, which we'll come to, he would coach there all the time. And kids were so happy when he showed up. And he was a very humble, no-nonsense figure. People would tell him, why don't you stay here and just coach us forever? So he was doing that in Algeria when the poor guy suddenly keeled over and died. You
mentioned a little bit about his childhood. Tell us about how he grew up.
Well, it's quite Dickensian. It's not really what one thinks of at all when you think of a Dutch childhood. I mean, he grew up 20 miles from my hometown. He grew up in a place called Heemstede. He's born in 1951, so these are the post-war years. Holland's quite poor. Many people have emigrated to Canada and Australia. And the Neeskens are really at the bottom of the heap. His dad works at the steel factory, the Hoogovens, and he also demolishes houses, partly because the dad likes to be outside, but he's inside in the steel factory all day. And they have a very small plot of land where they raise a few animals. Neeskens and his dad, including when Neeskens became a famous footballer, which happened very early, would go door to door asking people for peels to feed to their animals. He said he found it very embarrassing. The mum is sickly. She has tuberculosis and asthma. I mean, this is very weird. We're talking about the 1950s in the Netherlands. At one point, she's so bad that the kids have to go and live in a children's home for a while. Neeskens is terrible at school. He fails 2 years of primary school, and it gets worse when his mother is ill. Other kids are told that they can't play with him because he's too stupid. And the only place where he gets his revenge is in the gym class because he is brilliant at every sport. And he laughs at the other kids who are always laughing at him and who are teasing him and teasing his epileptic sister. He has to go out and defend his epileptic sister against the bullies. It's so hard.
Wow.
It's an incredibly unusual childhood in the Netherlands.
Okay, there's a movie in the making here.
There is a movie, but it would be a non-speaking one because Neeskens, I think he felt shame about how he spoke. He felt shame about who he was. He felt shame about his dad's job. And so he was not a talker. But the one thing he can do is sport. So as a teenager, he becomes not just a brilliant footballer, but a brilliant baseball player.
Wow.
He goes with the Dutch youth baseball team to the European Championship in Rome, and he has the best batting average of the Dutch team.
He could have been a cricketer too, I guess.
Well, Cruyff played a bit of cricket, but Cruyff was also a baseball player at Ajax. So Neeskens growing up near Amsterdam, Cruyff was a very gifted baseball player who could easily have, been a full international, was a catcher. I mean, Neeskens was a pitcher, he played shortstop, but his great gift was sliding, because in baseball it's very important, you slide to steal bases. And so he was a kind of scientist of the slide, which he would do in football. And he'd talk about how you slide and you throw your arms backwards so they don't slow you down. Many of Neeskens' most famous moments as a footballer are sliding. Sliding tackle's a big risk, because if you miss the ball, the opponent is 5 yards away. And so you could never miss.
Tell us about his time at Ajax, how he joins the club, and then the heights that he hits with that great Amsterdam team.
He's in his late teens. He's left school, and essentially he's cleaning floors in, I think, this service flat which gets rented out to people. He's very ashamed of that. His dream is to make it at the local club, RCH. And his grandpa is a fan. They're kind of in the second division of Dutch football, which is semi-pro. It's nothing, but he and his grandpa go and watch RCH in away matches. And he says to his grandpa, wouldn't it be amazing if one day I could play for the first team? So that's the height of his ambition. But he's already been picked for the national youth teams, and you get very, very famous players, because he's from a brilliant generation, it turns out, born around 1951. In the national youth teams, Johnny Rep, great man who had a heart attack last week as well, but seems to be recovering. Wim Rijsbergen, the Van der Kerkhofs. And Neeskens was famous for, in the Dutch phrase, he played with snot in front of his eyes. Like, he would go to the ultimate. In Britain, you'd say, be the first out the trench. Blood on his head. It's none of it bothered him. They play this one youth team match against Scotland. And in the words of Bert van Marwijk, who would become the Holland manager in 2010, he said the Scots had fielded 11 skinheads. So van Marwijk, who is a quite soft outside left, is terrified. He thinks these Scots are going to do me in. And he says Neeskens chased the 11 skinheads over the field and wins the match simultaneously. So he's totally the guy you want by your side in a bar fight or a 1970s football match, which is very similar. It's 1970, he's only 18 years old, but Ajax spot him. This kid who isn't just the first over the top, but is also actually a very gifted footballer. So they sign him. He doesn't have to clean floors anymore. So he thinks, brilliant, I can go to Ajax and I'll play in the reserves. If I could play in the Ajax reserves, that'd be massive. It's 1970, Ajax are just becoming a great club, and he falls, as the Dutch say, with his nose in the butter, because he's arrived just at the moment they're ready for greatness. But the greatness arrives partly because of Neeskens. So aged 18, he arrives. Within about 20 minutes, it's clear he's not going to be in the reserves. He's going to be in the first team. He's in the midfield, and Ajax had developed this pressing game, which we now think is normal. It's the game of Pep's Manchester City, of Jurgen Klopp's, as was Liverpool, of Arne Slot's Liverpool. But at the time, nobody in football does pressing. And they need a midfielder. So Cruyff is the guy who gives a signal to press. Cruyff, because he could read everything in football, he could read every moment of the match, and he was centre forward, he would shout, "Nu!" And then they would all press. Cruyff would spot the moment. And the guy leading the press, the guy charging at the defender with the ball, usually it was some poor hapless left back, the guy charging in is Neeskens. Because Neeskens is rapid, he's fearless, and he's playing for his bread, as he calls it, because he's grown up really poor. He really needs the match fee. He's sending the match fee home to his parents, his brother who's living in a squat. He thinks, if you get past me, you're stealing my match fee. So Neeskens leads the press. They become this even more of a pressing machine than they were before Neeskens. In 1970, 1971, so the season that Neeskens turns 19, he's a kid who's just been playing in the second division of Dutch semi-professional football. He's in the great Ajax. They win the European Cup. So at 19, they beat Panathinaikos, and he has won the European Cup. A guy who is so shy and overawed that he doesn't dare to shower with the stars. So he'll stand, he'll wait till everyone's showered, and then it's his turn because he's the lowliest. The masseur Salo Müller is this famous, cult figure masseur. He says to Neeskens sometimes, look, boy, you need a massage. All of you need massages. And Neeskens feels he doesn't deserve a massage. So eventually Salo works out what's happening. He says to Neeskens, you know what, when everyone's gone home, you come to me and we'll have time and I'll give you a massage and we'll talk. So finally he gets massages. His breakthrough comes, the first pre-season big warm-up match that he plays in 1970 for Ajax is against your beloved
Chelsea.
They play Chelsea.
Come on.
Neeskens comes in as a sub and he's brilliant. From then on, for the next 4 years, he is never out of the team. And he and this guy, Nico Reinders, are in central midfield, and they're known as the breakers. In Dutch, it's the breakers. And they break.
That's Dutch, huh?
Yeah, the breakers. Every opposition attack, they break, and that means that the Dutch fullbacks, Krol and Subir, can go up and down the wings because nobody gets past Neeskens and Reinders. He's in the Dutch team almost immediately. Like within 10 games of starting in Ajax, he's in the Dutch team. He'll be there for the next few years. And the crowds love him. Neeskens wins the ball. Neeskens comes in with a flying header, and the crowds chant, Neeskens, Neeskens, Neeskens.
Wow, really inventive. They thought about that one, huh?
Well, his nickname is Denees, so there is variation to it. Now, Denees, he's a little kid. He's the poorest person in the team.
He's massive.
He's not. He's quite slight.
Okay.
It's weird. So you think of Nees, he's terrifying, but he's quite slight. He's slim. He's small.
Who would you compare him to? A Conte?
He's much more vigorous than Conte. I mean, he can read the game, but he's a guy who comes flying in. Little bit of Brian Robson, but better. But his hero is actually Nobby Stiles. So he sees Nobby Stiles in the 60s and he thinks, that's who I can be. I can be the guy who works harder than anyone else and kicks everyone. But he's underestimated himself because later he realizes, I can also be a bit of a Bobby Charlton. So he starts to upgrade himself he comes in as Nobby Stiles. And people say, Neeskens, you pass really well. You can play football.
So there's a lot of beauty and flair in these teams, as we spoke about in our Cruyff episode, but there's also a lot of brutality and violence.
He was a very brutal player. One of the weird things about Neeskens is he welcomes being fouled as well. He really likes being fouled. I think he gets a kick out of it, an adrenaline rush. I think some people have that.
It's quite primal, the whole,
Yeah, so they play against Feyenoord, and Feyenoord have this midfielder, Willem van Hanegem, who will play with Neeskens for Holland and in the 74 team. And van Hanegem, I think, essentially is a sadist. He's a brilliant midfielder. He's also very brutal. And so Neeskens flies in on van Hanegem like he does with everyone. And at one point, van Hanegem, just walking away from him, elbows him in the head. And van Hanegem, his elbows are not soft.
Is that yellow card in those days?
Yeah, you might get a
ticking off.
Ticking off. So Neeskens is on the floor. He's broken his nose. Then Van Hanegem comes to check on him in the tunnel at half time and says, "You okay?" Neeskens thinks, that's brilliant. What a great guy. Neeskens and Van Hanegem kind of recognise each other. And he really gets a kick out of being fouled. At one point, Neeskens is in hospital having his tonsils taken out. Van Hanegem will break his nose in future occasions too. Van Hanegem comes to visit him in hospital with sweets. And they become very close in old age. It's a very moving interview.
Is how men show affection to one another. I always suspect this is how they...
Yeah, but I mean, this is very...
They show love.
Extreme kind of form of masculinity.
I'm getting Roy Keane vibes, but without the sweets.
Yeah, but I think Keane liked hitting people, but he didn't like being hit. But Neeskens really likes being hit. I mean, he'll talk about that in World Cup finals as well. And partly because he's just so into violence on both sides. People underestimate what a brilliant footballer he is and what brilliant timing he is. So in that first season, he just makes more kilometres on the field than anyone. And the older players start to look after him. So Sjaak Zwart, who's Ajax outside right, has a cigar shop, lives behind the cigar shop. And he says to Neeskens, look, you can't take the bus and the tram in and the train from Heemstede every day. The night before matches, you sleep at mine. So Neeskens comes to the Zwart house. Zwart has a couple of daughters, a wife. They look after him. And he sleeps on the sofa. So he's like the little boy who's being taken care of. Everyone has this fondness for Neeskens. They kind of love him. Towards the end of that first season, he's knackered. Ajax are playing in the League, the Cup, and the European Cup. They're winning everything. So he's shattered. He's 18 years old. He's never done this before, 19. And Michel says, look, we need to sort you out. You're tired. What you should do is you need to go on a drinking binge for 2 or 3 days. It's a very 70s remedy.
Well, they're all taking drugs as well. Performing enhancing.
This is a controversy later in Neeskens' career. So at this point, Neeskens 19, he's never drunk anything. There was also no money to drink. But okay, he goes to the later playing in Amsterdam, he gets drunk, does that for a couple more times. And then Michel's way, gets angry with him and says, you took it too far. And he gets angry with him. But Neeskens is fit just in time for the final against Panathinaikos, and Ajax win. And so in his very first season as a pro, he's won the European Cup, which is now the Champions League.
He's the Julian Alvarez of his day. He's won everything.
Yeah, but he does better than Alvarez because in 1972, which is their best season, they also win the European Cup. In 1973, this team with Cruyff wins the European Cup again. So Neeskens in 1973, he is 21 years old and he has won 3 European Cups. I mean, that is pretty, I don't know if anyone has ever done that. Not Messi, not Gerard Piqué. His start in football was a bit like Gerard Piqué coming into the Barcelona team in 2008.
I think Mateo Kovacic might have accidentally done that, but he wasn't really playing a role in any of that Real Madrid or Inter Milan teams.
And he wasn't 21.
No.
So this is just fantastic success. Neeskens has barely lost a match in his first 3 years as a professional. They go to the World Cup 74. Everyone should listen to our Johan Cruyff 1974 episode for the full story of that World Cup. That team electrifies everyone. I mean, they smash Uruguay and Argentina early on. A little Argentinian 13-year-old is watching TV in 1974. That 13-year-old will later say, I was a child when I first saw them, and it looked as if they played football without touching the grass. This is Diego Maradona talking. Wow. Maradona also falls in love with Neeskens. The climax maybe of Neeskens' career.
So I know what you're going to say. You're going to talk about the final.
No, I'm going to talk about the match against Brazil. It's not even the semi.
Okay.
They've done the second round stupidly as a group.
Okay, let's talk about Brazil.
So it's Holland-Brazil. And Jonathan Wilson says Johan Cruyff has called Holland's 2-0 win perhaps the truest example of total football. It's also probably the hardest, most violent match that even Neeskens has ever been in. At some point, Mourinho Perez gives Neeskens an elbow, which he's quite used to. Neeskens conks out.
I love you too.
He's revived with smelling salts. Later, he'll become a teammate for a year at Barcelona with Mourinho Perez. And he thinks, great guy, gave me an elbow, love it. They get on brilliantly. But after he's revived, or maybe before, he scores the Dutch opener. Everyone look it up on YouTube. He gets the ball halfway inside the Brazil half, gives it to Cruyff on the right. Cruyff waits, knows that Neeskens is going to sprint like a maniac into the box. Cruyff then passes it, takes a deflection, and Neeskens comes sliding in like a baseball player, and he brilliantly somehow lifts it over the goalkeeper as he slides into the top of the net. It's kind of the ultimate Neeskens moment. Later on in the match, he is kicked so hard by Luis Pereira that even the referee in 1974 has to give a red card. I mean, in 1974 it was impossible to get a red card, but Luis Pereira is sent off. Neeskens' words are, Luis Pereira was a great guy.
Sorry.
He's loving it. They're in the World Cup final and he's getting kicked all the time.
Yeah.
What?
Imagine if he was in the UFC, he'd be falling in love every day.
He would, yeah. He was kind of made for UFC. He would have to be in the welterweight because he probably weighed like 50 kilos. So in the final, you remember the famous passing sequence, right? Holland passed the ball around for a minute. Cruyff goes into the box. Actually, he doesn't quite get into the box. He's fouled outside the box.
But it's still given as a penalty.
Luckily, it's given as a penalty, or not luckily, given we know what happens. And Neeskens takes penalties.
This is weird to me. Why is that? Why is your midfield dynamo taking the pens and not Cruyff?
Because Cruyff didn't really have a hard shot. It's one of the oddities of Cruyff. He could curl the ball any which way, but he couldn't really drive it. Neeskens is fearless, so he never misses a penalty.
Wow.
He always took the same penalty. He would run up to the ball. 70s balls are a bit heavier than they are now. And he would either kick it with his instep or he would toe punt it. It's not entirely clear. The keeper would dive, hoping just to get out of the way. Because if Neeskens' toe kick penalty hit you as a goalkeeper, you were out for the count yourself. He's never nervous, except in the 74 World Cup final, because at the moment when they're given the penalty after 1 minute play, he hasn't actually touched the ball. So his first touch in a World Cup final is going to be taking the penalty. And this is the first time Holland's ever played in a World Cup final. So he actually mishits it. He drives the ball into the ground. And that's why in the famous picture you see dust rising and paint rising from the penalty spot. But he hits it so hard that it still goes in massively anyway.
It ricocheted off the pitch.
Off the pitch, yes. It appears to ricochet off the pitch into the net. It's the only time he says he was ever nervous in a football field. Also, what made it worse is as he was running up, Paul Breitner, the German fullback, shouts, Sepp, rechts von dir, Sepp to your right. And one of the oddities of Germany-Holland is that they can sort of understand each other's languages. Breitner is saying to the keeper, he's going to shoot it to your right. And Neeskens is thinking, yeah, I was going to shoot it to your right. And so then he changes his mind at the last moment. And
had they not discovered hand signals at this point, that you could just do that?
I think Breitner wanted Neeskens to know.
Oh, to get in his head.
To get in his head. Nice. That Breitner had read his cards, as it were. He scores in the first minute. Of course, the game ends in a tragedy. The Germans win 2-1.
Yeah, but that's immaterial to the...
But actually, the Dutch are really happy when they come home. They're welcomed by enormous crowds. Listen to our Cruyff episode. It's like they'd won the World Cup.
Simon, you've been tweeting lots of pictures about this dude who you're a little bit in love with, but he had a very special look about him.
Yeah, he was... I'd be interested in your take. So he was very much admired, handsome guy, very kind of hyper-masculine, long hair...
70s.
Very 70s. When you see him, you think it could only be one decade ever.
Indeed.
And then those bright orange shirts, which is a very 70s colour. What do you make of him?
I think where Cruyff has this very striking face, I think Cruyff is kind of beautifully ugly. Whereas I think Neeskens is just quite conventionally handsome.
Yeah, also sort of angelic.
Yeah, now you're describing all his character traits to me. They just don't fit the face at all. He doesn't look like this bruising, fearsome, leg-breaking slider. He looks like a little bit of a matinee idol. He looks like he'd play a nice number 10 sort of role, gliding around with a bit of flair.
Yeah, just a little angel, a soft player.
Lobbing his penalties rather than smacking them into the top corner.
No, but he's a hard ass. I mean, he's the ultimate hard ass. Now, 1974, Holland are the best team in the world, but Ajax are also the best team in the world. But Cruyff has gone to Barcelona. Rinus Michels, the coach, have gone to Barcelona. And they say to Neeskens, you should come to Barcelona. Now, Neeskens is at the best team in the world already, Ajax. But he has a problem. Because with a friend, he's bought a cafe. Because that's what 70s footballers did. And they were going to use Neeskens to kind of advertise and draw in the crowd. So he had spent a lot of time in the cafe talking to people about football for hours and hours. And they put in very expensive floor, but people would throw their cigarettes on the floor. So 3 weeks later, they had to get in a new very expensive floor. He lost 200,000 guilders on this cafe. He wasn't earning that much at Ajax.
Was it a special cafe? You know,
it was called Cookies.
Could you eat cookies there?
No, Cookies in English. It's an English style name, Cockies, but the Dutch pronounce it Cookies. So,
weed, marijuana.
If you look at the pictures, it's kind of young people's 70s, a lot of beer, sort of Dutch working class cafe. But anyway, Cookies is a total disaster. He needs to go to Barcelona, and I think all his money is sent directly to his creditors for a while, including his World Cup bonus 74. It goes straight to his creditors. He's reunited at Barcelona with Mourinho Perez, the Brazilian who knocked him out in the game. They fall in love immediately. They love each other. At Barcelona, he spends 5 years there. It's not as great as Ajax, nothing could be, but he does get voted best player in Spain in 1976. And he acquires the nickname Johan Segundo, or as the Spaniards say, Johan Segundo, so Johan the Second. So,
like mini Cruyff.
Yeah, so there's Johan Primero, there's
Cruyff,
and Johan Segundo. In Holland, they'd be called Johan 1 and Johan 2 as if they were a royal dynasty. Neeskens totally accepted that he was Johan 2 because, Cruyff was this great man, this great footballer. Cruyff could talk. Maybe he admired that most about Cruyff, that Cruyff could talk, Neeskens couldn't talk. And in Neeskens' word, the very best Johan was Cruyff without any doubt. In Barcelona, he becomes a cult hero. And women love him because this is Franco's Spain. When he arrives, Franco still has a year to live. Spain is still quite a repressive, hyper-Catholic society. And this guy with long hair, who has also become...
Never talks. It's perfect, very seductive, non-verbal communication, flirting.
Yeah, always, head wounds and bleeding. He's like a commando. And he tapes his ankles from the outside. So he always has white tape over his ankles. So he's got that special touch. He becomes hugely popular in Spain. We'll come to his Spanish ending, which is also kind of sad and beautiful. But while he's in Spain, they go to the World Cup 78, this time without Johan Primero, without Johan Cruyff, who's refused to go for family reasons, essentially. Of course, they get to the final. And in the final, there's this great picture of Neeskens as a wound on his lip because Passarella has given him an elbow. So he loves that, of course. Yeah. And the blood is...
Or kiss, as he calls it.
A kiss. The Neeskens' blood is spattered all over Alberto Tarantini's shirt. So Tarantini has blood on his shirt. Neeskens has a busted lip. Passarella in this photo is laughing because he's given someone an elbow. What could be better? And Neeskens said, I didn't care about pain. Passarella should have had a red card, but oh well, I also beat Leopoldo Luque and they could have given me red for that. So he has no hard feelings at all. Holland lose, but it's hard to win with all those soldiers on the touchlines with their guns in the Argentina of the generals. So the guy's lost 2 World Cup finals, but
he's cool with that.
He's all right with that. He had never expected. Look, if he'd have played for the first team of RCH, he'd have been delighted. So none of this was ever expected. He also wants to be loved because he goes back to Barcelona, and in 1979 they say, "Okay, we're getting rid of you," because there were only a limited number of foreign players you could sign. And they want to bring Alan Simonsen as European Footballer of the Year. And there also appears to be this conflict with President Nunez, who was a famous megalomaniac narcissist. And it appears there was an incident when Nunez was in the toilet and somehow asks Neeskens to hand him toilet paper. This is what I've read. I'm not quite... I read this without context. Yeah. I cannot vouch for the veracity of this story. But what I've read is... Nunez,
that's good to be telling it on a podcast. That's what podcasts are for.
I've added the caveat. I'm not sure this is true. The story goes that Nunez is in urgent need of toilet paper, asked Neeskens.
Well, like in the next cubicle?
I don't know where Neeskens was.
You guys all do it standing up?
Point.
Anyway, okay.
Maybe he was outside the toilet waiting on the president. Because Neeskens is a very kind of humble and serviceable guy. But when Nunez needs toilet paper, Neeskens refuses to go and get it. So from then on, Nunez cannot forgive him for this. And they're getting rid of Neeskens. But
because the chairman had skid marks on his trousers. That's insane.
It would be worth investigative journalists pursuing this story. But unfortunately for Nunez, in Neeskens' last match, they win the Cup Winners' Cup, European Cup Winners' Cup. It's the first European trophy Barcelona have ever won. So they come back to the town hall where Barcelona traditionally celebrate their triumphs. And Neeskens is in tears because he's leaving the club. He can't bear to leave Barcelona. So he's standing on the balcony of the town hall, blubbing, as the crowd chants, Neeskens, 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 the way Catalans do. He's devastated. And so he is never forgotten for this in Barcelona.
Oh, is he just a crier?
He never cried, but this was the time he cried. And it will help him come back to Barcelona decades later. He said he loved playing there because every match he played with goose flesh, in front of 100,000 people in the Camp Nou, whereas at Ajax in the great 70s team, they sometimes played in front of 8,000. He loved Barcelona and Barcelona loved him.
Neeskens is leaving Barcelona in tears, literal tears. He's not an old man. What does he go on to do next?
Well, he's 27, and in those days, if you were even a little bit old and famous, you went to the United States as a footballer. So he goes to the New York Cosmos.
Oh.
To play on AstroTurf, but he keeps doing his sliding tackles even on AstroTurf. Because he
must slide faster.
Slide faster, and it cuts up your legs, so it really hurts. He would love that.
Did he revive his latent baseball career? 27 for a baseball player. He's young.
There are no record of him appearing for the Mets or the Yankees. I wonder if he went to watch. He spent time, according to his Holland teammate Wim Rijsberger, who met him there again, in Studio 54. They had good times in Studio 54. Rijsberger says, happily, there are no images of that, so don't inquire too closely. And this is the point where there are reports that Neeskens' private life has gone off the rails, that he is addicted to substances. That becomes an allegation in the Netherlands, which he has always denied. And he said it caused him great pain to read that. But he falls out with the New York Cosmos manager, who's a very strict German, whom he had at Barcelona as well, called Hennis Weisweiler. Weisweiler thinks Neeskens is living it up too much. He ends up having to leave, but the Holland team, meanwhile, is in crisis. It's 1981. I've just turned 12. The most important thing in the world is that Holland qualified for the 1982 World Cup. To do that, we have to beat Belgium and then France in the qualifying group. What are you going to do? You call Neeskens.
What, just come and...
Yeah, so he's been kicked out of the Cosmos, so he's not really playing in a club.
He might be engaging in substance abuse, maybe, but nobody's drug testing.
Which he's denied. The Holland manager of the time is a little old grandfatherly man in a flat cap called Kees Rijvers. Rijvers brings Neeskens into his house. So Neeskens lives with the manager for a while, for weeks, and does a lot of running, gets fit. And in one of the best nights of my childhood, we beat Belgium, I think, 3-0. Neeskens is great. And it goes to the decisive match in Paris against France. I have this abiding memory of this Platini free kick, which passes between Ruud Krol and the goalkeeper, Hans van Breukelen, who are looking at each other accusingly, like, I thought you had that. And it goes into the net. I think France win 2-0. Tears in the Cooper household.
Holland don't qualify.
Holland did not qualify for the 1982 World Cup. And it's Neeskens' last match for Holland. He leaves without fanfare. There's no kind of flowers or let alone a farewell match. It's over.
And his football career is also over?
Well, he keeps playing. So he plays for various pretty small clubs, including the Kansas City Comets, a club called FC Bar in Switzerland, which I've not heard of either.
Bar or Basel?
Bar, B-A-A-R.
Oh.
So this is pretty small stuff.
Yeah.
He plays for Groningen in Holland.
I've heard of them.
It's a provincial town. He said the neighbours used to put their chairs outside the house in a position that they could look at the Neeskens house and see what was happening there.
That's a very Dutch thing to do.
It was very Dutch provincial. He couldn't handle it.
Lots of natural gas there.
This again is in the Apvisser. Wonderful. I would call it photo book life story. And then Neeskens becomes a kind of small-time manager. You know, he plays until his late 30s, but it's really, really low level. And then he starts managing very small clubs in Switzerland. Have you heard of FC Staffa?
No, I don't think they're on FIFA.
FC Singen? No.
Where are these?
In Switzerland.
In Switzerland, no.
Apparently, it says here they're in Switzerland.
Okay.
he really makes his name afterwards as an assistant manager, which is his natural role because he's not a talker.
He's Johan too.
He's Johan too. He's a natural right-hand man. He's very loyal, very supportive. So Guus Hiddink takes him to the World Cup 1998 as an assistant manager. Neeskens at this time is in his late 40s, but of course he plays in the squad scrimmage matches. And there's one incident during the World Cup when it's announced that a player, I can't remember who, has been injured by a Neeskens tackle in training and may not be able to play the next game.
That is funny.
So even at 46, he's flying in with brutal tackles. But they love him. Everyone loves him. He's a wonderful assistant. He's really loyal. He's a legend. The players all grew up wanting to be him. And then Frank Rijkaard brings him to Barcelona, where he's also an assistant. And it's his homecoming to Barcelona.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
In that Ronaldinho team.
Yeah.
He's the assistant.
So there's pictures of Neeskens at training with the young Messi.
Of course.
Yeah. I wonder if Messi was aware last week that Neeskens has died. I would like to think so.
Well, he's going to listen to this pod and he'll find out.
Yeah. And Neeskens has 4 years coaching a not small Dutch club called NEC Nijmegen.
No.
You haven't heard of NEC?
No, also not on FIFA.
One of the great moments in the Dutch league is always the neck-nuck match.
Sorry, it's such a sophisticated language, honestly.
Well, neck and knock up. Actually, neck in Dutch means neck, but neck at the football club is something else, and nuck doesn't mean anything. But there are clubs called neck and nuck. It's great. You would enjoy the Dutch league if you got more into it. He's 4 years at NEC, and when his hiring is announced, people in the club can't believe it. What, we've hired this legend, this global legend?
Okay, so he's still known as a legend.
He's still totally a legend.
But only in the Netherlands? Or do you think he has a resonance outside?
I mean, I think if he'd met Maradona would be like, "Oh my God, you're Neeskens."
Yeah, and then they'd elbow each other, break each other's noses, and declare that they're both in love. And
when NEC hire him, it's 2000, and a lot of people in the club are skeptical that he will show up. This might be some kind of joke or scam. He shows up on day one of training. And everyone's like, "You're Johan Neeskens, oh my God." He said, "Guys, let's train, let's do some sliding tackles." For the next 4 years, it's like that. He's very low-key, he's very amiable.
Does he do well?
He does all right. They qualify for Europe once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's not great, but I mean, being a head coach is not really his natural role because he doesn't see himself as a number one.
He doesn't have main character energy, does he?
No, he doesn't want to be a main character. He had everything to be a main character, but he just didn't aspire to that at all. He, I think, always had this inferiority complex about his very humble upbringings, about having failed years of school at primary school, about other people he thought being more articulate and intelligent. But he became a very cosmopolitan figure. I mean, he spent most of his life living in Switzerland.
Wow. So
he and his Swiss wife, the second wife, they lived somewhere in the mountains. And so they'd go from the Dutch flatlands where he grew up to the Swiss mountains, and he felt very at home there. You know, people in Switzerland didn't care that he was Neeskens and he was left alone. They started a charity for underprivileged children and also for children who were caught up in war and violence. So he would go and coach in camps, in refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria. And the kids loved him. They adored him because he was a very egalitarian figure. I think because his own childhood had been so hard, he had very high identification with kids who were having a hard time. So the Dutch FA were always sending him out on this World Coaches project to coach in all sorts of places. Even at 73, when he dies, he's doing that. You know, you can say, well, he wasn't a success as a manager, but he didn't really want to be a big manager. He wanted to be a little manager, and he achieved that. His last job is in South Africa at the Mamelodi Sundowns, 2012, and it's not a success, and there are problems with fans and so on, and so he quits and he thinks, not going to do this anymore. The weird thing is this 1974 Holland team, of which he's such a symbol, they stand for youth, energy, long hair, bright colours, joy, beauty. In my mind, I think in many people's minds, they're an emblem of youth, an emblem of the 70s. But one of the weird things about life is that you grow old. And so they've grown old. About half of them are now dead. And earlier this year, they had a reunion, the 1974 team, the ones who are still around. And they said, this is so much fun, let's go and play golf in France. So they arrange a golf trip to France, they have a lovely time. This is 6 weeks before he dies. And at the golf trip, everyone is really impressed by how fit Johan Neeskens was. Because they're playing golf, it's 40 degrees, crazy thing to do. And they're all in their 70s. And Neeskens was totally fine. He said he had a gym in his house. Of course, he's training all day. And then suddenly in Algeria, he collapses and dies. And a few days later, his mate, Johnny Rep, who played in Dutch youth teams with him and then in 2 World Cup finals with him and at Ajax with him, poor old Rep had a heart attack too and has had a pacemaker installed and has been quoted from hospital saying he's doing much better. But Rep said, when I heard about Neeskens' death, that was a terrible blow and I'm not over it. And I think Neeskens was held in such love and affection by people who knew him and people who didn't know him and people like me who saw him from a great distance. It shows you what a footballer can mean to people. Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. This was a special episode of Heroes and Humans. We'll be back with our normal scheduling on Thursday. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.